Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 9th of April 2024. Sorry, everything's just a little bit later today. And my frontline update, I forgot to press go yesterday. I recorded that, I don't know, 16 hours ago or something ridiculous, and I've only just pressed go, so sorry about that. Right, we'll go to the military aid and equipment segment. We'll see if we can get through this to do the geopolitical stuff in the same video. Ukraine will lose the war if the US Congress does not unblock the aid package. This is coming from Zelensky himself.
Is giving his strongest, starkest warning yet about the state of the war against Russia without military aid coming from the United States.
If Congress does not help Ukraine, Ukraine will lose the war. And we need to find a public format for this. If Ukraine loses the war, other states will be attacked.
Volodymyr Zelensky also says Russia will soon be, quote, more and more insistent on dragging nuclear weapons into this debate.
I mean, this is a big claim, and I don't know if it's true, but and I don't know whether Zelensky believes it is true. But they definitely do need that US aid in order to have the best chance of prevailing in this war. It is so important. Russia are gaining in certain ways. I think they're gaining in the ways that China are supporting them. They're gaining in their ability to strike targets within Ukraine with their missiles. I don't think they're doing very well on the front line. I think Ukraine have done an insanely good job at attriting Russian forces in a massive way. But there are so many ways that this war is being carried out. Okay, so yet there are drone and missile attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure that are hurting. And there is a work that Russia is doing in the information space. There is a work they're doing to undermine European elections and European democracy and American elections and American democracy. And there's some scary stuff coming out about that when you look at what, again, Marjorie Taylor Greene is and others are continuing to say. It is incredibly scary. So Russia are winning in certain ways, Ukraine are doing really well in other ways, and it's this big, as I'm sure you feel as well, I'm up and down the whole time with how I evaluate this, but I'm just super worried about global politics going forward. I'm super worried about the insane influence that Russia seems to be able to get with their resources, the return on investment they get in international democracy, international politics. Right, German government has contracted Rheinmetall to deliver another 20 Marder 103 infantry fighting vehicles to Ukraine. German aid to Ukraine has said, I already communicated that in March 2024. New information is that Rheinmetall is integrating additional laser range finders, enabling efficient and precise target engagement. So this is that they will come equipped with really decent, I guess, fire control systems and whatnot. So good news there. Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock from Germany hopes that there will be clarity before the G7 foreign ministers meeting as to who can supply Ukraine with additional air defense capabilities. Quote, unfortunately, the stocks of our own Patriot systems in particular are now pretty much exhausted. An overview of all Patriot systems in Europe and worldwide is needed in order to see where something can be delivered to Ukraine quickly. So the idea is that Germany and its allies are working on a possibility of purchasing Patriot systems for Ukraine from third countries as the supplies for it have been exhausted, and that's Annalena Baerbock. So Germany have run out of Patriot stuff, and it's all about where else can they get them from. And this is why it's interesting that Norway may be getting themselves hold of a Patriot, and that could lead to them being able to make it under license through Kongsberg in Norway, as I think Germany has the ability to do that in Germany. So it's about ramping up production of Patriot system. You can bet your bottom dollar that Patriot, just like HIMARS, is going to be high on people's shopping lists around the world in terms of air defences. French aid to Ukraine does a little thread here on Caesars. This isn't particularly like breaking news, but just an interesting appraisal of Caesars. And remember, they are due to get, I think, another 78 Caesars this year. We shoot and we leave. It's a change from our old equipment from the USSR. To support the Ukrainian army in the Donbass, France made urgent delivery of 6 Caesars in June 2022. So it's going back a long time now. According to Ministry of Defense, quote, France wanted to provide Ukrainians with a weapon system adapted to their war. The Ukrainians needed stealthy, rustic equipment adapted to the intensity of this conflict. The Caesar meets this objective, their objectives in terms of ease of use, tactical effectiveness, and rapid deployment. Not sure what rustic means there particularly. The French army acquired this gun at the end of the Cold War. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the use of mass artillery was no longer appropriate. Heavy self-propelled artillery then enjoyed a certain popularity among military staff. Quote, artillery doctrine had evolved little since the Second World War. It was based on the activation of formations of 6 to 18 imposing machines, poorly mobile and equipped with outdated armor protection. These systems took 10 to 20 minutes to implement and made them very exposed targets. The artillery of the time was not aware of the threat of intelligent munitions. This led me to design a system that meets the objectives of tactical and strategic mobility, speed of action, and movement once the shot is fired. The camouflage is based on a completely autonomous operating capability, which requires means of navigation and calculation of firing parameters specific to each gun. In this new concept, each gun has become an autonomous terminal of the command system, says Pierre-André Moreau, General Armaments Engineer and creator of the Caesar gun. In June 2022, the Caesars were immediately deployed to defend the Donetsk region. With the front line on the verge of collapse, the Ukrainians urgently deployed them to repel Russian armoured breakthroughs and destroyed advanced command posts. Their first notable and publicised feat of arms was a recapture of Snake Island, bombarding the Russian positions that had been firmly entrenched since the start of the invasion. In the following weeks, they were sent to Zaporizhia, from where they carried out artillery attacks to cut off the enemy's supplies and supply lines. There were theories that, or claims that, they put these on barges in order to get closer to Snake Island and then bombard Snake Island where the Russians were at. The Caesar is at the centre of the clashes of Vuhledar and Avdiivka, which are still ongoing. In Vuhledar, the Ukrainian manoeuvred with these guns to prevent the town from being encircled. We arrived and opened fire within about 40 minutes. The intensity of the shooting was very high. We worked day and night. Caesar missions include harassing the passage of Russian armoured vehicles to stop them in minefields. In Avdiivka, it operates as close as possible to the Russian front lines, targeting the reinforcement columns. Their role is to cause the most destruction among the opposing forces. According to the Ukrainian commander, 10 or so Caesars have already destroyed the equivalent of a brigade, around 2,000 men, and several hundred vehicles. According to a French colonel, Ukrainian tactics are based on, quote, the individuality of the pieces which evolve with a certain autonomy. Ukraine move their Caesars over long distances. They spread out their guns and make them cover a very specific area. They are accompanied by drones that give the coordinates of the target to be fired. It fires 6 shots in less than a minute. 6 in less than a minute. That's great, isn't it? I think the Archer can do 8 in a minute or something, but, you know, this is incredibly impressive. Leaves and takes up another position. Their tactics are based on this constant movement and this harassment of fire from Russian positions. In January, Le Cornu, the French foreign minister, launched the Artillery Coalition, a coalition born after a trip to Kiev last winter, where Zelensky praised the real impact of French guns on the ground. Quote, there is a diplomacy of Caesar guns. The French defence industry has excellent export results. As the war, they're the second biggest in the world now. As the war continues, production rates must follow. The aim of the coalition is to maximise the number of artillery systems for the sole benefit of the Ukrainians, to reduce production times and to be equally efficient in the supply of ammunition, to have systems immediately ready for use. Interesting thread there. I hope that was of some benefit for you. And here's an infographic on France, leader of the Artillery Coalition. So you can have a read of that if you pause the video now. Right, okay, moving on. The European Union has sent emergency aid to Ukraine in the form of 157 generators by Austria, Germany, Sweden and Netherlands, and 10 large capacity power generators, 1 megawatt, from its own stockpiles. The aid is already on its way to Ukraine. Good stuff, EU there. A group of prominent Australians. Oh, struth, mate. Flaming hoon. It's very poor. Including former PMs, diplomats, business, union and military leaders are demanding Australia give frozen assets to Ukraine. Sources, the Sydney Morning Herald, saying up to $9 billion of cash from Russia's oligarchs who actively support the war is frozen. Bloody frozen. Thanks, Australia. And thank you for giving me permission, though you haven't, to do that incredibly bad Australian accent. Wall Street Journal uncovers, we're going to spend some time on this, how black market supplies Russian troops with Starlink. Russian troops in Ukraine continue to obtain Starlink terminals through shadowy supply chains, while SpaceX has not shut them off, the Wall Street Journal reported on April the 9th. And indeed, the Kyiv Independent goes into this as well, talking about how these haven't been shut off, even though they could have done so. So let's go to this Wall Street Journal piece. The black market that delivers Elon Musk's Starlinks to US foes. This is a long article, and it talks a lot about Sudan, where they're very active in being used as well, even though technically they shouldn't be. Anyway, let's read some of this. Although Russia has banned the use of Starlink, so Russia themselves have banned Starlink for security reasons, the satellite internet service developed by Elon Musk's SpaceX middlemen have proliferated in recent months to buy the user terminals and ship them to Russian forces. That has eroded a battlefield advantage once enjoyed by Ukrainian forces, which also rely on the cutting-edge devices. The Moscow salesman, who in an interview identified himself as Oleg, said that most of his orders came from the new territories, quote, a reference to Russian-occupied parts of Ukraine, or were for use by the military. He said volunteers delivered the equipment to Russian soldiers in Ukraine. On battlefields from Ukraine to Sudan, Starlink provides immediate and largely secure access to the internet. Besides solving the age-old problem of effective communications between troops and their commanders, Starlink provides a way to control drones and other advanced technologies that have become a critical part of modern warfare. So not only can you control things through Starlink, but you can communicate securely where otherwise you have to use radio comms that can get intercepted. And that's caused a huge problem, certainly at the beginning of the war, when loads of Russians' comms were intercepted. And that led to, commanders getting closer to the front line and then getting sniped. And it was, a big problem. They've started laying cables so you can't have interception of those in a closed system, closed comm systems, interception of those messages. But Starlink is providing a way that they can encrypt communications. The proliferation of easy-to-activate hardware has thrust SpaceX into the messy geopolitics of war. The company has the ability to limit Starlink access by geofencing, making the service unavailable in specific countries and locations, as well as through the power to deactivate individual devices. And this is where the controversy lies, because Elon Musk geofenced Crimea to stop the Ukrainians using it in Crimea, and it led to the failure of a mission. And as the Ukrainians then claimed, the death of people, because the Russians were then able to launch things from Crimea that would have been destroyed and kill Ukrainians. And so literally that geofencing that Elon Musk did led to the death of Ukrainians. And was to the benefit of Russians. And then he stopped that geofencing so that the Russians themselves can use Starlink within Crimea and within the Donbass. So Luhansk and Donetsk and Zaporizhia and Kherson, the Russians behind their lines can now use Starlink. So it is geofenced so that Ukrainians couldn't do activities, and then not geofenced so that Russians could do activities. And it seems like the actions of Elon Musk have been to the benefit of Russia. Anyway, the Wall Street Journal tracked Starlink sales on numerous Russian online retail platforms, including some that linked to US sellers on eBay. It also interviewed Russians and Sudanese middlemen and resellers, and followed Russian volunteer groups that deliver SpaceX hardware to the front line. The journal investigation found that a shadowy supply chain exists for Starlink hardware that is fed back from deals in Africa, Southeast Asia, and United Arab Emirates, putting thousands of white pizza box-sized devices into the hands of some American adversaries and accused war criminals. Many of those end users connect to the satellites using Starlink's roam feature after the dealers register the hardware in countries where Starlink is allowed. So you register them in, I don't know, Georgia, Kazakhstan, wherever, and then you get them to the front line, and there you go. In Russia, middlemen buy the hardware, sometimes on eBay in the US and elsewhere, including on the black market in Central Asia, Dubai or Southeast Asia, and then smuggle it into Russia. Russian volunteers boast openly on social media about supplying the terminals to troops. They are part of an informal effort to boost Russia's use of Starlink in Ukraine, where Russian forces are advancing. And of course, nothing's been done about this so far. Now, Ukrainian officials say they have contacted SpaceX about Russian forces using Starlink terminals in Ukraine and that they are working together on a solution. Ukraine's telecoms regulator in March published a decree mandating that only Starlink terminals registered with authorities in Kiev would work in occupied areas in and around the front line. It isn't clear when those new rules will take effect or how they'll be enforced. US Assistant Secretary of Defense for Space Policy, John Plum, said Friday that SpaceX is working together with Ukraine to try to end the Russians' use of the terminals on a front. Quote, "We're working with Ukraine and we're working with Starlink," he said during a briefing. Neither SpaceX nor Musk responded to requests for comment. It seems rather frustrating that so long after these have been claimed to be used, I mean, we're talking, is it a year since there were first claims of Russian usage of these? They have not been turned off. Those that no one's been able to find out, which terminals are being used in those areas, and that those areas have not been geofenced. Like, Musk turned off Crimea like that to stop the Ukrainians doing an attack, which led to, I think, one of those early Magura V5 drones washing up on the Crimean shore as the drone attack didn't work. He turned it off like that, and yet, there doesn't seem to be this urgency to geofence the other areas where Russia is now freely using them, and to find out what the Russian terminals, where they are, which accounts are using them, and to disable those accounts. It just seems bizarre. Well, it doesn't seem bizarre to me. Like, it's exactly what I expect from Elon Musk. A user agreement posted on Starlink's website says customers can't resell Starlink access without authorization, and that violators of its rules could lose access to the service. Consumer accounts generally must be started by the user in his or her own name. Customers face limits on selling or transferring terminals they bought. However, that still happens hugely. I mean, you can put whatever rule you want on your website, but if you don't do anything about it, it's kind of pointless. SpaceX developed Starlink as a civilian technology, and Musk has sketched out big ambitions for the service. There are almost 5,000 operational Starlink satellites now orbiting Earth. You see the New York Times article I shared with you on that, which gives the infographic of the interactive thing of all the satellites going around. Like, this makes, in my opinion, Elon Musk the single most powerful human being on Earth. There are almost 5,700 operational Starlink satellites now orbiting Earth, and it has 2.7 million customers and a new production facility in Texas. Revenue was $1.4 billion in 2022, and that was up from $222 million the year before. So revenue up 7 times, and that was 2022. Imagine what it's like in 2024. Starlink said its user agreement that the service isn't designed or intended for use with military weapons. Last year, a top SpaceX executive said the company took steps to limit Ukraine from using Starlink for direct military purposes. So it's taken steps to limit Ukraine, but doesn't seem to have taken steps to limit Russia, at least not publicly. It just seems entirely bizarre. Musk has expressed discomfort at times about Starlink's role in Ukraine's war, telling his biographer Walter Isaacson that the service was designed for peaceful uses, not drone strikes. "How am I in this war?" Musk asked Isaacson. "Well, I'll tell you how you're in this war, because you control 5,700 satellites that gives you the biggest informational power over the entire globe. That's how you're in this war and any war going forward. Whether you like it or not, you have thrust yourself into the information space in the world, and people are vying for control of information, both in terms of like comms, like communicating with each other, like the physicality of that, the physical dimensions of me sending a message to you safely and you're over there and I'm here, but also controlling the information space in terms of, I don't know, Twitter or X. You control that, and you control the parameters by which people communicate on there. So you are super important. Starlink has said that if SpaceX finds that one of its devices is being used by any sanctioned or unauthorized parties, the company investigates and could deactivate terminals. You appear not to have deactivated a single terminal, as far as I'm aware, and so therefore that's just, powder puff, meaningless guff that you are saying there. Yeah, I could walk to the moon. See how easy it is to say stuff? Actually doing it, that's a different matter. After Russia invaded Ukraine In February 2022, Musk activated Starlink in the country. Ukraine supporters, including Poland and the US Agency for International Development, bought thousands of Starlink terminals for the nation. The terminals helped the outnumbered and outgunned Ukrainian soldiers beat back the Russians using the secure internet connection provided by Starlink. Ukrainian spotters using drones communicated Russian positions to artillery gunners. Moscow's troops often lack the necessary equipment for communicating with their commanders, and they tried introducing new devices of their own, but now essentially they are just getting hold of Starlink and have a parity across the communications arena there, it seems. Russia has worked for around a year to employ Starlink on the front, according to a person with knowledge of the situation. It began using terminals widely early this year, after it figured out how to register the devices in other countries, that person said without elaborating. Searching for Starlink terminals on Russian search engine Yandex.ru yields numerous dealers like Oleg who sell the hardware online to buyers in Moscow and outside the Russian capital. One website, Starlink.ru, promised, quote, tested performance in the occupied areas of Crimea, Luhansk, Donetsk and Kherson, with monthly fees starting at $100. The website provided contacts for a dealer, including Russian cell phone number and a Yandex email. A representative of the firm declined to speak to a journal reporter. Many of the dealers in Russia advertise their hardware openly. The website Oleg works for has embedded eBay listings by people from Ohio to New Jersey selling Starlink terminals. An eBay spokesperson said the company, quote, abides by the laws and regulations of the countries in which it operates and complies with relevant international laws and sanctions. eBay didn't address the US listings embedded in the website of Oleg's employer. And then later the article goes, in September 2023, Musk said he declined a request to activate Starlink in Crimea, the Ukrainian Black Sea Peninsula Russia annexed in 2014, alleging that Kiev wanted to use the service in an attack on Russian naval vessels. In a post on X, Musk said doing so would have made SpaceX complicit in a major act of war and escalated the conflict. However, he has not geofenced Donbass and now Crimea. So, what? Russian Starlink dealers advertise on their sites that Crimea is no longer geofenced, and neither are the Russian-occupied regions of eastern and southern Ukraine, where Moscow's troops are using the systems in their fight to grab more Ukrainian territory. In other words, completely contradicting what Musk claimed initially. A 27-year-old major in Ukraine's 92nd Brigade who uses the call sign Angel said in an interview that he first saw Russians using Starlink earlier this year because they hadn't thought to camouflage a white antenna, which measures about 2 feet high and a foot wide. They're mostly using the newer models, he said, noting that Russian dishes are high priority targets. Quote, it means there are drone operators somewhere nearby. But he said he hadn't noticed any changes in Russian behavior or strategy since they started using Starlink. So that's one, I guess, good thing, but I doubt that's really the case. It's not like they're gonna be widely using Starlink and there's no benefit of doing so. There's clearly a benefit of doing so, and so there will be behavioural changes there. Whoever this person is, I doubt can necessarily feel that on a day-to-day basis, but I think strategically, operationally, it is going to be so vital for Russia to be able to compete with Ukrainians and have some parity in this area. The rest of the article talks about how they're being used in Sudan, which is itself, interesting and arguably very problematic. But the idea is that Elon Musk appears to have done the square root of naff all to stop the Russians and Sudanese taking advantage of Starlink and using it to prosecute an aggressive war against the Ukrainians that involves countless war crimes. And yet, it seems that Musk has done more to inhibit Ukraine's use of Starlink than it has done to inhibit Russia's use of Starlink, outside of the existing laws that exist on sanctioning. And it wasn't Musk that stops him selling them to Russia. Those are international sanctions. So, but Musk himself has done more to hurt Ukraine than hurt Russia, I would argue. I'm happy to be proven wrong. Another worrying situation is that Russia, or at least they're claiming, or here in Die Welt, the German news media source, saying that Russia produces 30 shaheeds per day, and by the end of the year, the figure may grow to 87 shaheeds a day. That's 300 at the moment a month. 30 by 30 is 900 a month, which is insanely high, and that could go to 87 a day times 30 is stupid amounts, right? That's going to be what? I don't know, 2,700 or something like that. But this is incredibly worrying. This year, Russia plans to produce 2.1 million pieces of artillery ammunition, up to 130 long-range and 100 short-range missiles are produced every month. Even museum tanks will last in Russia for another 2 to 3 years. So there are worrying claims about the production capabilities of Russia here. I would, if I was to be as rose-tinted glasses about this as possible, Russians claim often about their production capabilities, and it doesn't look like evidence matches that, because they claim to be making 300,000 drones a month, and it doesn't look like there's anywhere near that amount being used on the front lines. So yeah, there is a claim and there is reality. Let's see. Now, this video is, of course, as so often with Russian claims, they often get just disproven straight away. Well, the Russians, when the Ukrainians procured cluster munitions from the US and indeed Turkey, Russia went mental about that as if it was some terrible war crime or so on and so forth. But we know that Russia's been using cluster munitions on Kharkiv. We've seen the evidence of that from the beginning of the war, right? So Russians use them when they get them. Here, a Russian is taking apart one of their own missiles that fell short. So Russians take apart one of their aerial bombs that accidentally dropped on their own position but didn't explode. Remember Russia's campaign convincing Western audiences how evil it was for the US to supply cluster munitions despite using them en masse since the first day of the war? Well, this is Russia themselves evidencing their own use of cluster munitions. Actually, it turns out that my political one went on for a long time, so I'm splitting these two videos up, and the geopolitical one will come next, but that's the end of the military aid and equipment segment.